This one, Modi is also in queue.
Jai Janendra. Since our Jain Center became vegan, first one to be vegan in 2018, many members were left clueless on how to adapt to a plant-based diet with a flavorful palate. Therefore, in January 2020, Kala Circle, whose mission is to connect with the community and manifest the Jain virtues, initiated this culinary art program with the motto to demonstrate healthy and plant-based fusion recipes with the artistic flair of plating. It was received very well, but then there were a lot of nutritional queries which were left unanswered. Luckily, we came to know about Dr. Reshma, who is, by the way, Mahendra Shah's daughter, a great artist from Pittsburgh. She's vegan herself and author of an award-winning book, Nourish, which is available on Amazon. A qualified pediatrician with integrative medicine, with masters in public health, and currently serves as an instructor and oversees the nutritional program. She's here to solve all our nutritional myths in our day-to-day life. So fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the journey to a vegan lifestyle. I'm going to request our president, Jayesh Bhai, to say the Naukar mantra.
Jai Jinendra, good afternoon. Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayariyanam, Namo Uvajjayanam, Namo Loye Savasahunam, Eso Panchanamukaro, Savapavak Panasano, Manglanancha Savvesim, Padmam Havai Mangalam. Jai Jinendra and welcome everyone. We are so happy and excited to hear from Dr. Reshma Shah, and we are very fortunate that we have her. She will be giving us some more information about veganism and vegetarianism. So without taking up too much of our time, let me pass it on to next one. And thank you. Welcome everyone.
Yeah.
Well, would you like me to go ahead and start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to spend Sunday afternoon with you. I'm just going to begin by sharing my screen. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about plant-based diets for a healthy life and also for a healthy planet. After I'm done with my talk, I'm hoping to have some time to answer all of your questions. So for our time together today, I'm going to cover three broad topics. I'll begin by discussing some of the health advantages of a plant-based diet. I'll also address some of the environmental concerns as they relate to diet and nutrition. And then finally, I'm going to focus on some specific nutritional concerns. These are the questions that I get asked the most often when people are thinking about adopting a plant-based approach to eating. And I'll also spend a little bit of time focusing particularly on dairy, because I know that's probably one of the areas of concerns for this community. In terms of the benefits, there are three broad advantages to a plant-based approach to feeding our families and our communities. It's a healthy, sustainable, and compassionate way of feeding our families. We know that poor nutrition is the single leading contributor to chronic disease and premature death in the United States and throughout the world. It's estimated that we spend 75% of all of our healthcare dollars treating patients with chronic lifestyle-related diseases. And the link between diet and disease extends to many conditions. It's estimated that 80% of heart attacks, 90% of type 2 diabetes cases, 30 to 70% of cancers, as well as a whole host of other conditions from stroke, constipation, dementia, and so much more are directly related to what we eat. I think for a lot of us, there can be some confusion in terms of knowing what diet is really best for health. One minute, the headlines seem to be telling us that cholesterol is bad for us, and the next minute they say it's just fine, go ahead and eat butter. But when you look at the broad consensus from the leading dietetic, medical, and public health organizations, whether it's the World Health Organization, the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, or even the Harvard School of Public Health, they actually have quite a bit of agreement in terms of what constitutes a healthy diet. And what these leading organizations tell us is that we should be limiting our consumption of trans and saturated fat, refined carbohydrates, cholesterol, and red and processed meats. When it comes to the foods that we should be including in our diet, there's also a broad amount of consensus. We should be looking to eat more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And I wanted to take a minute just to define what I mean by a plant-based diet. So a whole food plant-based diet is a diet that aims to maximize the consumption of nutrient-dense plant foods while minimizing heavily processed foods and animal foods in the diet. And again, it focuses on vegetables, fruits, whole grains, lentils, beans, seeds, and nuts. And sometimes there can be a little bit of a confusion in terms of the distinction between a vegan diet and a whole food plant-based diet. So a vegan diet is a diet that aims to eliminate all animal foods in the diet. And that can be very impactful in terms of protecting our planet and also extending compassion to animals. But you can see from this slide, the foods on the top of the foods that are on the top of this slide, they're all vegan foods. But I think most of us would recognize that they're not necessarily healthy foods. So they don't contain any animal products, but they're often fried foods or very high in sugar. Whereas the foods on the bottom are also vegan, but they focus on whole plant foods. And so for the emphasis of this talk, we're going to focus on these whole plant foods. But I think it's important to remember that when we are feeding our families and we're in our communities, that we should really focus on progress. Nobody can be perfect. And this isn't about eating a perfect diet. It means you can have some sweets at Diwali, all these things, but the focus is really on what you do most of the time. So when you look at the longest lived populations in the world, there are these areas called the blue zones. And some of you may have heard about this research. So there are these pockets of populations throughout the world. There are 5 such populations in Okinawa, Japan, in Icaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, in Costa Rica, and right here in California, actually amongst the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda. And these populations have the highest concentration of centenarians. So these are people that are living to age 100 and beyond in pretty good health. They're still active in their communities. They're working in their gardens. And researchers wanted to know, why are these communities enjoying such good health? And they found that they actually have quite a few common characteristics. They all tend to have a very strong focus on family. They tend not to smoke very much. They're very physically active. They're engaged in their communities. And when it comes to diet specifically, they all eat a plant-based diet, and they all eat legumes or beans as a staple in the diet. There have been many, many health advantages associated with plant-based diets, and research has shown that people eating a plant-based diet have improved outcomes when it comes to mortality and longevity. They have a reduced risk of overweight and obesity, as well as lower rates of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, hypertension. The list goes on and on and on, so many conditions. Most of the leading causes of death in the United States, and this is actually extending into countries like India and other poorer countries now too, are related to what we eat. The number 1 cause of death in the United States is heart disease, and 1 in every 4 Americans will die from heart disease. And while cardiac stents and bypass procedures are life-saving in the acute situation, they don't get to the heart of the matter in terms of preventing heart disease from beginning in the first place. It's estimated that 90% of our risk factors for heart disease are preventable, which means that we have some say in our risk of developing heart disease. And those 4 factors include smoking, exercise, obesity, and of course, diet. There was a study conducted looking at people who already had existing heart disease. So these are people who may have had a bypass surgery, or maybe they even had a stent placed, and they were able to reduce their risk of further heart disease by 78% by making aggressive diet and lifestyle changes. One of the things that contributes to our risk of developing heart disease is our intake of saturated fat. And these are the top 10 sources of saturated fat in the standard American diet. And about 25% are made up of animal flesh type foods like chicken, processed meats, beef, things like that. But that means 75% don't actually come from those kinds of flesh foods. You'll see oils, snacks, desserts, and dairy foods make up a huge amount of our saturated fat intake. And in fact, dairy foods like cheese, milk, butter, 50% of our saturated fat comes from those foods alone. And for some people who are vegetarian, they're actually consuming more cheese, more dairy, because they're replacing the animal foods. So this is just a reminder that milk and dairy foods can be a significant source of saturated fat in the diet, and saturated fat can contribute to atherosclerosis, which leads to heart disease. And you might think that as a pediatrician, I might not really be worried about heart disease, but we know that atherosclerosis actually begins very early in life. When they did autopsy studies of children, they found fatty streaks in the aorta of children as young as 3. By age 10, nearly all children have evidence of these fatty streaks. And by the time we're in our 20s, we're actually beginning to see these fatty streaks even in our coronary vessels that supply our heart. The second leading cause of death in the United States is cancer, and about 1,500 people die each day in the United States from cancer. Excuse me. The World Cancer Research Fund published its recommendations on cancer prevention. And some of these recommendations are not very surprising. We shouldn't smoke, we shouldn't drink too much alcohol, we should be physically active, maintain a healthy weight, but they had some very specific recommendations when it comes to diet. So they said that a healthy diet and lifestyle behaviors could prevent 40% of cancers, and that basing our diets around plant foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans, which contain fiber and other nutrients, could reduce our overall risk of developing cancer. Another leading cause of both morbidity and mortality in the United States is diabetes. In 1960, about 1 in every 100 people, so about 1% of the population, had type 2 diabetes. Currently, that number is closer to 10%. And experts estimate that if the current trends in diabetes continue, that by the year 2050, 1 in every 3 Americans will have type 2 diabetes. So how many people are on this call? Let's see. So that means about 15, 20 people just on this call would have type 2 diabetes. Diabetes is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. It's the leading cause of blindness in working age adults. It's the most common cause of kidney failure. I found this statistic to be quite alarming. So people with diabetes are twice as likely to develop heart disease or to have a stroke. We spend about $245 billion a year in the United States taking care of patients who have type 2 diabetes, which is 1 in every 5 healthcare dollars. So if you can imagine, if 1 in every 3 people has diabetes, how much we'll end up spending on just the care of diabetes. And just as with heart disease, increasingly we're seeing type 2 diabetes in children. Sometimes it's being diagnosed in children as young as 8 years of age. And the true devastation of a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes in a child is that they end up living longer with these complications. So instead of developing kidney problems in your 50s or 60s, you can imagine they develop it at a much earlier age. There was a very large prospective study done amongst the Seventh-day Adventists. You remember that's the group in Loma Linda. That's one of the blue zones. And this Seventh-day Adventist community, they actually live a very healthy lifestyle. They don't smoke, they don't drink, they're very active in their community, but they eat a variety of diets. So the researchers wanted to look, if you keep all these things the same, they have an active lifestyle, they're not smoking, not drinking, what is the effect of diet? And they found that those people that are eating a plant exclusive or vegan diet, and this is a healthy vegan diet, not like a Oreos and, Diet Coke kind of a diet, that they could reduce their risk of developing diabetes by 60%. So just to summarize the health benefits, there was a paper published just a couple of years ago looking at this topic, and the authors concluded that the evidence is strong, consistent, and compelling that a diet of predominantly or even exclusively whole plant foods can promote health, selectively treat and reverse disease, and confer comparable benefit to the planet. The what we should be eating then for disease reversal and health promotion for the sake of people and planet alike is clear enough. The truth is that we all should be eating plant-predominant diets. The what of future eating is not in question. The questions are all about how we get there from here. And this brings me to the second advantage of plant-based diets. Animal agriculture takes an enormous toll on our planet. And as a pediatrician, I actually think that dietary recommendations that don't address the climate crisis are inadequate. They're insufficient. So we know that animal agriculture is responsible for about a quarter of all greenhouse gases, which is more than transportation. Additionally, it's the leading cause of rainforest destruction, species extinction, ocean bed zones, water pollution. It's responsible for over 90% of the destruction of the Amazon, and it occupies 45% of the Earth's ice-free landmass. In terms of water use, the meat and dairy industry use up to a third of the Earth's fresh water supply. Looking at this from a slightly different perspective, it takes 2 football fields worth of land to feed one person the standard American diet. And those same 2 football fields could feed 14 people eating a plant-based diet. Roughly half of the world's grains go to feed livestock. And this is happening at the same time that close to 1 billion people are going hungry each and every day. Some experts estimate that if we would take the food that we use to feed all this cattle and livestock and just feed it to humans, that we could largely solve the problem of world hunger. Additionally, about 70% of the antibiotics produced globally go towards animal agriculture. And this is not only harmful to the animals that receive these antibiotics, but it's a leading cause of antibiotic resistance, which the World Health Organization identifies as one of the biggest threats to global health. So we know that food is intimately connected to health, and increasingly we're seeing that food is intimately connected to the health of our planet. And we're beginning to see this in many of our dietary recommendations. This graph shows, it's actually a wonderful graphic from Our World in Data, and it shows the greenhouse gas impact of a variety of sources of protein. And you can see beef is at the top of the list in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, the top 10 sources of greenhouse gas emissions are all animal foods. Plant foods are lowest in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions. The most recent Canada food guides, it's very interesting. Canada released its new food guides in 2019. And what's particularly interesting about Canada's food guides when you compare them to the US food guides is that they specifically said that industry could not be influenced in the recommendations. So the Dairy Council, the Meat Council, all of these big lobbying groups did not have a part in these recommendations. And you'll see they made a pretty dramatic change. They did away with the meat and milk category entirely and instead replaced it with protein foods with a strong emphasis on plant proteins. Additionally, they replaced water as the drink of the choice instead of milk. So milk isn't even on the plate that they have in the Canada Food Guideline. Additionally, the Eat Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, and Health is a team of experts from a variety of fields around the world. And they were looking to answer the question of, can we feed a future population of 10 billion people a healthy diet within planetary boundaries? And what this expert panel concluded is that food is the single strongest lever to optimize human and environmental health on Earth, and that a diet rich in plant-based foods and with fewer animal source foods confers both improved health and environmental benefits. Over and over again, plant-based or exclusively plant-based diets, vegan diets, have been shown to be the most climate-friendly diet. But even if you do include some animal foods in the diet, you can see that there's a significant benefit the more you trend towards a fully plant-based diet. And I think with the climate crisis, I think we're just getting used to the news. Every day there seems to be a new climate catastrophe. In California, we see the wildfires all the time. We saw over the summer the floods in Europe and China, the heat dome in the Pacific Northwest. It's going to be a regular occurrence that we're going to see over and over again. For those of you that are interested in learning more about this topic, there's a wonderful book called We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast. And I love this quote from the book. The author says that changing how we eat will not be enough on its own to save the planet, but we cannot save the planet without changing how we eat. And this brings me to the last advantage of plant-based diets. It's a compassionate way of feeding our families. This is a quote from my co-author, Brenda Davis, and she says that being vegan isn't about personal purity or about moral superiority. It's about making a conscious choice to widen your circle of compassion by avoiding animal exploitation as far as is possible and practical. And in fact, most Americans agree. 94% of Americans in a recent survey said that they believe that animals that were raised for food should not suffer. But this is incongruent with the fact that 10 billion farm animals are raised and slaughtered for food each year in the United States, and 99% of them come from factory farms. Animal-centered diets hurt animals. It makes no sense to cause such pain, suffering, and death of other living beings if it's not necessary. But I think over and over again, when I bring up this topic, people wonder, especially for those of you who might be parents or grandparents, is this way of eating? Will my family be able to meet their nutritional needs? And do I have to be worried about supplements and other nutrient deficiencies? So I wanted to take the last little bit of time to address some of these questions. This was a position statement that was put out by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics a couple of years ago. And the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is the world's leading professional dietetic organization. It's not a vegan organization. It's just the most comprehensive dietetic organization in the world. And what they said was that it is the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics that appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including total vegetarian or vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. Well-planned vegetarian diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, and for athletes. And I would add for seniors as well. I think the place where most people get stuck is appropriately planned and well planned. Am I going to have to be so careful? How do I know how much of this to eat and how much of that to eat? And the one thing I remind people is that our diets are already fortified in a way, because when you think about it, when you buy, the next time you pick up a carton of milk, you'll see it's fortified with vitamins D and A. And so our food system is already fortified with nutrients in order to prevent deficiency. And so if you're vegan, if you're vegetarian, you just have to pay attention to a few nutrients, and the rest of it is not too much to worry about. There have been lots of studies looking at the growth and development of children raised on a vegan and vegetarian diet. And over again, they've shown that when the diet is well planned, vegan and vegetarian children grow and develop just as well as children who eat meat and dairy and eggs. I have this little chart on my website, and it can be a handy thing for some of the common nutrients, because people wonder, well, where do I get my protein? Where do I get my vitamin D? Where do I get my calcium? And this little chart just shows some of the common plant-based foods that can give you some of these nutrients. And I'm going to talk about, we won't have time to go over this whole chart today, but I did want to specifically talk about a few of these nutrients, especially the ones that come up most often. This is probably the number one question I get asked. Where can I get my protein if I'm on a plant-based diet? So the largest mammals in the world, gorillas, elephants, giraffe, can you imagine how big they are? They're all vegan. They all eat a plant-based diet. So I always say, if these large animals can get their protein needs met on a plant-based diet, I think we can as well. I think there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to protein and plant-based diets. All plants contain all 9 essential amino acids. People used to say that you have to combine plant proteins, like eat rice and beans together in order to meet your protein requirements, but that research is not true. Basically, you can meet your protein requirements as long as you eat enough calories and if you eat enough variety of foods. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those foods are in particular. I think it's important for us to sort of shift our perspective when we think about protein. Most people think that animal proteins, so whether it's beef, chicken, fish, or even eggs and milk, are a good source of protein. Both plant proteins and animal foods contain protein and micronutrients, but animal foods also contain cholesterol, saturated fat, hormones, antibiotics. Remember, I said 70% of the antibiotics go towards animal agriculture, and those antibiotics end up going into the animal foods. They also use up more land and water, and they cause an immense amount of animal suffering. Whereas plant foods contain fiber, phytonutrients, antioxidants, they're more sustainable, and they're compassionate. 97% of Americans meet their daily protein requirements, whereas less than 3% or less than 5% of Americans meet their daily fiber requirements. So when people ask me about protein, I always wonder, are they getting enough fiber in their diet? And we know that fiber is actually a critical nutrient. Fiber helps us to decrease our risk of heart disease, diabetes, colon cancer, breast cancer, constipation. It helps to regulate our blood sugar, lower cholesterol, help with weight control, and it supports the health of our gut microbiome as well. So in terms of how much protein you need, the amount of protein you need is going to vary by age. So very young children and seniors sometimes have slightly higher needs for protein. Some people suggest that if you're eating a diet that's very high in fiber, that you increase your protein intake by 10 to 30%. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a comparison. So if you take foods that are thought to be really good sources of protein, like I mentioned, chicken, beef, fish, they have about the same amount of protein as you can find in tofu, in beans, in soybeans, in tempeh. Veggie patties, lentils, and certain seeds contain the same amount of protein that you can find in cheese, eggs, and yogurt. And a glass of cow's milk has the same amount of protein as a glass of soy milk. So you can absolutely meet your protein requirements on a plant-based diet. I just wanted to show you a quick example. So if you had just like a day of eating, so for breakfast, you might have some oatmeal with soy milk, some hemp seeds and walnuts and fresh fruit. Maybe for lunch, you'd have a tofu stir fry with some brown rice and vegetables, hummus and veggies, tea made with soy milk, and then some dal and just roti for dinner. Just that alone, you'll get more than 70 grams of protein, which is more than adequate for almost everybody here on this call today. So as long as you're including a variety of foods and try to include protein in all your meals and snacks, it can be very easy to meet your protein needs on a plant-based diet. Another nutrient that I think I was surprised at how few people actually know of our need for essential fatty acids, the omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids have been shown to cause improved outcomes in terms of heart disease, depression, dementia, and typically omega-3 fatty acids, when people think about omega-3 fatty acids, they think about fish and seafood because those tend to be high sources of omega-3 fatty acids. But the parent compound of both EPA and DHA can be found in things like soy, walnuts, flax seeds, hemp seeds, chia seeds. But I think for especially for seniors, and for younger kids, I think it's not a bad idea to think about taking a DHA EPA supplement. One of the problems with getting our DHA and EPA from fish is if fish contain a lot of environmental contaminants and pollutants, so you can get high levels of mercury and other contaminants, and the amount of fishing that we're doing, it's just not sustainable. We're going to deplete our oceans. So if you're not taking an omega-3 fatty acid supplement with DHA and EPA, I would recommend consuming walnuts, hemp seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds. Those can also help you to meet your needs. This is one nutrient that I always want to talk about because this is absolutely a nutrient that plant-based eaters need to be concerned about, which is vitamin B12. Deficiency can lead to some really serious health outcomes. Something as mild as anemia, but also permanent neurological issues. So anyone that's eating a vegan, vegetarian, plant-based diet should make sure that they're getting enough B12 in the diet. Interestingly, the Institute of Medicine actually suggests that anyone over the age of 50, no matter what kind of a diet you're consuming, should take either a B12 supplement or consume foods that are fortified with B12, because senior people over the age of 50, which I guess I'm now in that category too, it's difficult even for those people to get their B12 from animal foods. The good news is B12 is a very, very easy nutrient to supplement. You can either take a B12 supplement, they're pretty inexpensive, they're easy to take, or you can consume foods that are fortified with B12. Oftentimes, a lot of plant-based milks like almond milk, soy milk, they'll be fortified with B12. So if you have a couple of servings of a plant-based milk that's fortified with B12, you can meet your B12 needs that way as well. I think most of us know about vitamin D. It's really a critical nutrient to support bone health. It helps to modulate our immune function, as well as regulate insulin production, and it has a lot of potential preventative effects in terms of cancer, heart disease, and cognitive function. Many factors influence our capacity to have adequate vitamin D levels. Sometimes the season and the time of day, if you're not getting it from sunlight, your geographical latitude. So if you're living pretty northern or southern, it's difficult to absorb vitamin D from the sun. If you use sunscreen, which we should be doing just for skin cancer prevention, or if you're using a lot of clothing, you also won't absorb vitamin D from the sun. And people with darker pigmented skin also have a more difficult time absorbing vitamin D from the sun. The main sources of vitamin D include sunlight, fortified foods like plant-based milks. Remember, cow's milk is also fortified with vitamin D. It's not natural in vitamin D. Very, very few foods actually are naturally high in vitamin D. And so I think for most of us, it's advisable to take a supplement of either 1,000 to 2,000 international units daily. A lot of it's going to depend on what your particular level is. So it's pretty safe to take 1,000 to 2,000 units of vitamin D a day without really concern. But for some people, they may need a higher dose depending on what their levels are. So for this supplement, I do recommend that you consult with your physician to see what your vitamin D status is and then to see how much supplementation you need. And then the last nutrient I wanted to talk a little bit about is calcium, because I think one of the main reasons that we often I remember when I was growing up, encouraged a lot of milk drinking is for calcium, because you want strong bones. Calcium is a very important nutrient for bone development. And cow's milk is a very concentrated source. But cup for cup, if you compare a glass of cow's milk with a fortified plant-based milk, like for seniors and for older people, and even for younger people, I really like soy milk because it has a lot of protein. And if it's fortified with calcium, it has the same amount of calcium as a glass of regular cow's milk. There was a recent study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine from the Harvard Research Group, and they looked at the relationship between milk and health. And they wanted to know, is milk a healthy food? Should we be consuming milk? And what they concluded from this paper is that increased intake of milk is unlikely to provide substantial benefit, and harms are possible. Dairy cows are exposed to, for cows to be producing milk, they either have to be lactating or they have to be pregnant. And so they have a lot of, hormones, and those hormones go through the breast milk. So there's an increased exposure of sex hormones through cow's milk. Dairy products such as cheese and milk, as I mentioned before, are the main sources of saturated fat in the diet. Calcium and vitamin D can be obtained from other supplements and foods without the potential negative consequences of dairy. And limiting dairy production could make a major contribution toward reaching international greenhouse gas targets. I think that when we think about the harms of dairy, this is what we imagine: a beautiful cow and it's with its baby. But the reality is this is what the dairy industry is about. It's a lot of suffering, and the vast majority of the milk that 90+% of the milk comes from factory farms. And I just wanted to go over just a few facts about dairy. It's important to remember that cows make milk for the same reason we make milk: to feed our young. Dairy cows are separated from their babies shortly after birth, and this is traumatic for both the baby and the mother. Male calves are raised and killed as veal. So in a dairy farm, if it's a female cow, they're used to produce dairy, and if it's a male cow, they're slaughtered and sold for meat. Females, again, are repeatedly impregnated, so they have to continue to produce milk. Dairy cows are sold for meat when they're 4 to 5 years of age, but a cow could typically live for 20 years. Additionally, most of the global population, 65 to 70% and over 90% in some populations, are lactose intolerant. So it doesn't even make sense to recommend milk because it makes most people that drink it sick. We are the only species that drinks milk from another species. I talked about the lactose intolerance and the amount of suffering. We can absolutely meet our nutritional needs without dairy, and it's something to consider. And I know that this is difficult for a lot of people, so I always encourage people to start with the things that are easiest for them. So try different plant-based milks, see how you like them. Nowadays, they even have delicious vegan cheeses that can substitute for regular cheese. In order to optimize bone health, there are a few factors that we should consider. Include plenty of calcium-rich foods in the diet, dark green leafy vegetables like kale and broccoli. If you're getting tofu and it's set with calcium, that also has a great amount of calcium in it. Beans are a good source of calcium, and all those fortified plant-based milks provide as much calcium as a glass of milk. We also need to make sure that we're getting adequate vitamin D. Fruits, vegetables, and protein. Limit the amount of salt and alcohol in the diet, and no smoking. Smoking has been shown to be detrimental to bone health. And then lastly, we want to maintain a healthy weight and do exercise, especially weight-bearing exercise is important for bone health. So I'm just going to leave you with a few steps to consider as you think about approaching a plant-based diet for health and for the environment. Try to make whole plant foods the foundation of the diet. That should be the vast majority of what your plate is composed of. Emphasize plant sources of protein, so things like beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, tofu, tempeh. Whenever you can, choose whole grains over more refined grains, so oats, whole wheat, brown rice if you can. Choose healthy sources of fat and try to limit the amount of saturated fat in the diet. And variety is the key for nutrition. So the more colors that you can eat, the colors of the rainbow, you increase the amount of phytonutrients that you're going to get in your diet. And then don't be afraid to use fortified foods and supplements as needed. And the 3 most common ones I would consider are B12 for sure, vitamin D for most of us, and an omega-3 fatty acid supplement that contains EPA and DHA. I also wanted to emphasize with the omega-3 fatty acids, you want to choose not the fish oil, because the fish oil is going to come from, it's extracted from fish. But fish, the way that fish get their EPA and DHA is actually through plants in the ocean. So the fish eat those omega-3 rich plants, and that's how they become rich in omega-3. So you want to get an algae-based omega-3 supplement, not a fish oil-based one. And that's it. This is how you can get in touch with me. The most active place that I am is Instagram, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Reshma. Thank you very much for such an informational talk. Mona, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a question. Basically, nowadays, there's a lot of hype about organic food and, organic vegetables, organic fruits. Does organic food make a difference in diabetes, heart disease, and cancer?
So I don't think we have enough data to say that organic food is necessarily better than conventionally grown produce. The most important thing I try to emphasize is eat more produce. So if you have the resources to be able to purchase organic foods, I think that it decreases our exposure to pesticides, which we don't really fully know the long-term effects. So what I recommend is if you're able to do organic, that's great. But if the organic is too expensive, the most important thing is eat more fruits and vegetables. So if you could eat this many fruits and vegetables eating organic, or this many fruits and vegetables eating non-organic, I would say do non-organic. And there's always these lists that come out every year from the Environmental Working Group. There's some foods that what I like to think of as thin-skinned fruits and vegetables, so things like strawberries, will have a higher content of pesticides. But things that have a heart, like a banana, it's, you don't have to worry so much about it being organic because it's got that protective layer. So I think for me, the most important message is eat more fruits and vegetables. And if buying some conventional produce makes it easier for you to do that, it's fine. If you can afford organic, then do it. But if not, I think just eat more fruits and vegetables.
Oh, great. Do we have anyone?
Maheshwai wanted to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Dr. Shah, thank you so much for very, very good information. It was packed with a lot of good information and you had limited time. So I wish you had more time to expand, and hopefully Kala Circle can arrange another session. However, I have a specific question. One of the protein sources is tofu.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't know how, maybe you can shed some light, that tofu is a highly processed food. Number one, is it highly processed? And if it is, we hear that processed food is not good for you in general.
Yeah. So I think that's a really great question. And when I think about processed foods, there are two things you want to consider: what's being taken away and what's being added. So on the one hand, you have foods like Coca-Cola. It's very processed. It's just you're adding lots of sugar, preservatives, dyes. So that's one end. Tofu is a processed food, but it's not a highly processed food. The way they make tofu is they basically take soybeans, they cook them down, then they coagulate the milk, and sometimes processing a food actually makes it healthier. So one example I'll give you is a lot of grains in the United States and around the world were fortified with zinc, B vitamins, things like that to prevent nutrient deficiencies. So when you say processed, I always think about what's being added and what's being taken away. So if you're adding sugar, you're adding salt, you're adding fat, it's probably going to be less healthy. If you're taking away fiber, that's going to be less healthy. But tofu, it is a processed food, but it's not a heavily processed food. And I think tofu is like one of the most versatile, easy, nutrient-dense, healthy foods that you can eat. And I'm not worried about how processed it is. I think what you may be referring to is if you look at some of the veggie meats, it'll say soy protein isolate. Those foods I would try not to eat too much of, but like tofu that you're just buying in a container, it's perfectly fine and healthy to eat. And if you look at some of the longest lived populations in the world, like in Asia, tofu is a staple in the diet.
Okay, just a follow-up question. So is there any recommendation how often it's safe to eat tofu, like twice a week, 3 times a week, once a week?
You can have, I would say, about 2 to 3 servings of soy a day. So for instance, if you do a cup of soy milk and a serving of tofu, that's totally fine a day. So you could have tofu every day if you wanted to. I wouldn't do like 3 glasses of soy milk and then 3 servings of tofu. So I would say aim for 2 to 3 servings maximum of soy foods a day.
Is between tempeh and tofu, is one better than the other?
So a lot of people think that tempeh, tempeh is a little less processed and it's a fermented food. So I think the problem with tempeh, at least in my family, I think tempeh is a little bit, the taste is, there's like a little bit of a bitterness, the texture and the taste. So some people don't like tempeh, but I think tempeh is perfectly healthy. And I think the key is not to get focused on any one food. Variety is the key. Have some tempeh, have some tofu. And when you do that, you're sort of mixing up the nutrients that you're going to get. So just like you would never only just eat broccoli, you want to have broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower. The more variety you can include, I think it's going to improve the overall health of your diet.
Okay, last quick question. Sorry, I'm taking too much time. But as to soy milk, another myth that soy product in excess is not good for women. And
that's all it used to be. And I think especially with breast cancer. So there was this thought that people who had breast cancer or a history of breast cancer, they shouldn't consume soy foods because they have phytoestrogens. And phyto means like plant estrogens, but that's not the same thing as human estrogens. And in fact, when you look at a lot of Asian countries like Japan and China, they have lower rates of breast cancer. And even in women who had breast cancer, those who consume soy on a regular basis did better. So there are only 2 reasons that I would not have soy in the diet. Well, a couple of reasons. The only reasons not to include soy are, of course, if you're allergic, and there are some people that are allergic to soy, you absolutely don't need to eat soy. But if you're allergic, don't eat soy. And then for some people who have thyroid issues, if they're sort of borderline in terms of being hypothyroid, it's not that you can't consume soy, but you might want to work with your endocrinologist just to make sure your thyroid hormone levels are stable. But otherwise, there's really, and if you don't like it, if you don't like soy foods, that's fine. But I think that including, 2-3 servings of, I usually say 2 servings of soy a day, absolutely no problem.
Okay. Do I have time for one more question? I'm sorry.
Can we go to the next one? Because I think there's someone else.
Since there was a discussion about soy, there was a question. For many people, soy causes constipation. So is there any other alternative or any way of consuming it that would avoid the constipation part?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't heard too many people having constipation with soy. I have heard people getting constipated with dairy, with milk. What I would say is just make sure you're getting enough, make sure you're getting enough fiber in your diet, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, things like that. And then maybe go slowly. So start with a small serving and kind of work your way up. I haven't really heard of too many people having problems with constipation with soy foods.
Oh, okay. Priya has a question. Priya, are you there?
Yes, I have a question. This is regarding nuts and seeds and omega fatty acids that you discussed earlier. I want to know that how much of nuts and seeds, to be taken every day, or should it be supplemented with the supplement, or either or?
Okay, so I didn't have as much time to talk about this when I was presenting, but basically, without getting too much into the biochemistry of it all, there's a parent fatty acid called ALA. And ALA is a fatty acid. It's an omega-3 fatty acid that's found in hemp seeds, chia seeds, walnuts. And our body converts some of that ALA into EPA and DHA. But not everyone is really good at converting it. And for some people, they will not get enough EPA and DHA unless they take a supplement. And for that reason, I generally recommend it's not a bad idea to take an EPA DHA supplement. Now, if you either can't find it, don't have access, what you could do is increase the amount of ALA to twice the amount just to try and facilitate more of that conversion. So about an ounce of walnuts a day, 1 to 2 tablespoons of hemp seeds, chia seeds. Again, I think variety is good. For added reassurance, I don't think that it's a bad idea to take an EPA DHA supplement that's algae-based. But if you absolutely do not want to, of all the supplements I mentioned, that one tends to be the most expensive. And you do have to do a little bit of research to make sure that it's algae-based and not fish oil if you want it to be vegan. but I think there's enough data to suggest that it might not be a bad idea. And then on top of that, if you did some extra walnuts and chia seeds and hemp seeds, it's not going to hurt.
Okay, great. And so any particular brand, the vegan brand that you would recommend, which has both EPA and DHA?
Yeah, so Nordic Naturals makes a vegan one. What I do for my family is actually, I'm entirely vegan, and most of my family is. I would say my family is like 95% vegan. There's a specific vitamin that I take. It's called Complement Plus, and it has basically all the things that vegans can sometimes have difficulty getting. So it's got omega-3 fatty acids, it's got vitamin D, it's got B12. And so it's just kind of a multivitamin that's specifically made for vegans. But if you're going to start taking it, I would just make sure that you are not taking a bunch of other supplements because you don't want to overdo it. So the only reason not to sort of take a multivitamin is if your doctor's already prescribing you vitamin D and B12, you wouldn't want to do that on top of it. So I would look at Nordic Naturals if you're looking just for omega-3. And Nordic Naturals, actually, I think they make a fish oil one and an algae-based one. And you want to make sure to do the algae-based one.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So it's Nordic Naturals, and the other one, the multivitamin, what is it called?
I'm going to put it in the chat. I think that might be
good. Great. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We have Ashish Chaudhary. He has a question. Ashish. Ashish Chaudhary.
Yes. Yeah. Hi, my name is Manisha, and I have a 3-year-old kid. And so my question is, when the kid's diet will be changed from meat-based or from vegetarian to vegan, then I guess we will cut a lot of fat. Automatically, a lot of fat will be cut, and then it will have immediate weight loss. And I think that is a most important thing. A lot of family is concerned about that. Okay, kid is reducing weight.
Yeah. So we wrote a whole book on that topic, and this talks about all the ways that you can avoid that from happening. So you have to make sure that kids are growing well, and you need to include a lot of healthy fat in their diet. So kids that are between the ages of 2 to 3, they still need about like 40% of their calories from fat. And as they get older, they still need about 25 to 35%. So you do not want to do a low-fat diet in kids, but you want to use healthy sources of fat. So ways that you can get fat into the diet of a child that's plant-based or vegan is nut and seed butters, peanut butter, almond butter, soy milk, olive oil, lots of nuts and seeds. So including healthful sources of fat. I think for vegetarian diets, the main sources of fat are oftentimes dairy and cheese. And, they have a lot of cholesterol and saturated fat, things that you don't want. So you want to include lots of fat in the diet for young kids, but you just want to make sure that it's healthy sources of fat. The other problem that some plant-based kids can run into is if the diet is really high in fiber. So for adults, all of us, we're trying to control our weight. We want to, make sure that we're staying healthy. We do a lot of fiber in the diet. So we say brown rice, lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains. But for kids that are having trouble gaining weight, you don't want to do too much fiber. So for kids like that, doing some more refined grains like pasta or white rice is perfectly fine. So what happens is if the diet is really high in fiber, they get full very quickly and then they can't eat as much. So doing a little less fiber, making sure they have lots of healthy sources of fat. And I think for kids, like peanut butter, almond butter, smoothies are a great way to add some extra fat in the diet. You can use soy milk and then put some, nut butter, seeds, nuts, all those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Okay. We have Anuja here. She has a question. Anuja.
I'm on a plant-based diet since quite some time. However, what is the cause of the hyperpigmentation, like melasma?
Yeah, I think a lot of that can be sun exposure. It can be genetic. I think that one thing you might want to look at is just make sure you're not iron deficient. So if you're getting routine blood work and your iron levels and all that stuff are okay, some of it just might be sun exposure and genetics.
Okay. Anything else would you suggest for it though, to fade it?
That I would probably ask a dermatologist. It's definitely not my area of expertise.
Okay, thank you.
We have Rupa. Rupa had a question.
Is Rupa here?
Rupa Shah, please unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Oh.
My question has already been answered, so thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Mahesh Bhai, you had another question. You're welcome to.
A quick question. Thanks for taking my question again. Some dairies are considered treating their cows much better than the industry, dairy industries. For example, I know one dairy in California is called Strauss. I don't know if you know anything about that. S-T-R-A-U-S-S, Strauss. Do you know anything about that? Or if someone cannot be vegan, absolutely, would it be okay to consume milk from Strauss, for example?
Yeah. And that's a question that it's a very valid question and it comes up often. And so what I would say is that cows that are raised on farms like that, they definitely suffer less, right? They're not being crowded in those bins. They're not being, oftentimes with the cows, they'll cut their tails off, they'll mutilate them, they'll do all kinds of things. So on a farm like that, they may not be doing that. But remember, as soon as the cow stops producing milk, it's no longer beneficial for the farmer. So that cow ultimately has to be slaughtered, and it's slaughtered for meat. So when you consume milk, even though you are not eating meat, it contributes to the meat industry because that a cow could live 20, 25 years, and dairy cows are slaughtered after 4 or 5 years. So I think I've not been vegan my whole life. I ate all sorts of things. So I understand that it can be very difficult to make the transition. And it's absolutely not about being perfect, but making this the best steps that you can to move forward. My parents, who are very supportive, I still cannot get them to give up the milk and the tea. They still won't do it. And I've given them soy milk and almond milk and oat milk. And I understand it's difficult, but I think it's important to be conscious of what's going on. So it's true that those Strauss cows, they're probably not suffering nearly as much as the cows on factory farms. But ultimately, no farmer is going to keep those cows after they stop producing milk. So they're sold and slaughtered for meat. And I think the real harmful thing too is if you imagine the milk that cow produces is for its child. But the baby cow is usually taken away from the mother right away. And can you imagine how traumatic it is for a mother to be separated from its child?
I fully understand all that. And I don't consume dairy milk.
Yeah, I think that some people say, I could be vegan, except I cannot give up cheese. And I say, then be vegan, except for cheese. So you do what you can, and just don't be afraid to try it. Just because you can't, what I usually tell people, it sounds like you're already there, but for people who are trying to make the transition, I say, do the best that you can, but don't be afraid to revisit it. So maybe, I can give you an example. My own son, who is not vegan, I went vegan, and my husband and my son were not vegan. And for a long while, they weren't really interested in even being vegetarian. And so I just kept cooking food. And then one day my son said to me, Mom, I want to try to be a vegetarian. And so you just have to keep the conversation open and tell people to do the best that they can. But don't be afraid to sort of look at it. Like, is it true? Is it true that I couldn't give up milk if I really knew what was going on with these animals? And the last thing I want to say is, in terms of health, you can be extremely healthy and not be vegan. You do not need to be 100% vegan to be healthy. The only reason to be 100% vegan is for the environmental issues and for the ethical issues related to factory farming and raising animals. But if you had a little bit of animal foods in the diet, you could still lead a very healthy life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. We have Tejas, who has a question. Yes, right there.
Hi, I joined the meeting kind of late, so is it still okay for me to ask you a question?
Oh, sure. It's fine with me.
Okay. Personally, I don't see, or I can't tell much of a difference between vegan or the vegetarian food. So I'm fine with both of those. And I take it that this meeting is pro-vegan, but what I'm telling you, or what I wanted to ask you was, I've even heard from the pundits that if you do not consume milk, then the cows would be sent to slaughterhouses immediately. This is in reference to the previous question you had. I'm just telling you, I'm not a researcher. I'm not in favor of any one thing or against anything. What would you have to say about that?
So the whole dairy industry, those cows are artificially impregnated. And so if you stop that cycle, you're not creating these cows to produce milk that have to be slaughtered. So it's an industry. If we stopped consuming milk, they would stop impregnating all these cows and having factory farms. So it's just the cows that are used for dairy
Demand and supply.
Demand and supply. And the cows that are used for dairy production, they're killed at 4 to 5 years, but most cows live to 20, 25 years. So
right, but like let's say if there is no demand for milk or dairy products, do you think that all these farmers or whatever ranchers, they are going to keep the cows as pets because there is no other use?
No. So basically, what will happen?
This is what I've heard from the pundits as well. Okay.
Right. So what will happen is that you may have a period of time, but okay. So let's say you have a farmer, and we know there's nobody's buying the milk. You're right. Those cows will likely be slaughtered, but then he won't be bringing on a whole new batch of cows. Does that make sense? The only reason those cows are, it's not like these cows are in the wild and you're just, they are artificially, I don't use this term because I think it's a very dramatic term, but a lot of animal rights activists will say those cows are raped, right? The cows are artificially impregnated just to produce our milk. So if we stopped consuming milk, if there was no longer a demand for milk, the farmers would stop doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pradeep bhai has a question. Oh, Pradeep bhai, you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Thank you. By the way, wonderful presentation. I loved it.
Oh, thank you.
Reshma, and many people they keep talking about this kinder milk. And the milk may be kinder in terms of animal treatment, but it's not, is it any healthier? The milk itself has problems.
Right.
As you described in many ways. So that milk doesn't suddenly become healthy milk.
No.
Or does it?
No, it's not healthier. I mean, I think they've looked at like, grass-fed beef or grass-fed cows, and maybe they have more nutrients. There may be higher in omega-3 fatty acids because they're getting a lot of those greens that contain. So I think the nutritional benefits are probably minimal in terms of doing those pasture-raised, grass-fed cows. It's very, very minimal, but it still has cholesterol, saturated fat, hormones. All those things are still in it.
And the environmental effect is still the same.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of the conversion rate to protein is still very low.
Yeah. And in fact, actually, some environmental scientists say that grass-fed animals, it's actually a higher environmental cost because they have to grow for longer. And so they're actually living for longer, which is producing more methane and greenhouse gas emissions and all those things.
So those become just political argument more than looking at it deeper, that there is no real benefit even to the kinder milk.
No,
it is not going to become healthy for you.
No.
Or save environment or nothing. Second thing is you covered the nutritional side exceptionally well. And to me, as good as it is, there is still the side benefit. Because to us Jains, which is most of this group is, I think, herding even a single animal is a big problem. Particularly Panchendriya animal, which the cows are and all the milk producing animals are, which is a huge problem in terms of bad karmas. And in the United States, except for the super rich, you can't even get the real milk, forget it, right? It's just not available. It is one of the simplest things we can do to be vegan and save ourselves from much bad karmas. And I really have compassion for people who are not seeing the violence involved in the dairy industry. I have a big struggle with that. is why is that so hard to see for people? Can you explain why that is?
Oh, I can absolutely explain why that is, because I was someone who used to eat dairy. And so what happens is that when you're not at a place where you can see it, you just say, I can't look at it. It's too hard. But once you allow yourself to see it, I think it's one of those things that you can never unsee. There's some really dramatic footage and documentaries and things like that. And I can't look at it anymore, but I don't need to be convinced. I already believe it. But it can be pretty dramatic to see that footage, to see what happens to those animals.
Just the fact that their children are taken away right away, it itself is enough.
Yeah.
If you
cows are they're very emotional beings. I've seen some footage where you can see that a mother cow is just weeping.
Yes.
And it's just, can you imagine that being your child? There's no way you would do anything.
Yes, or going after the truck that's taking the child away.
Yes.
For miles and miles and miles.
Yes.
So everything you said is perfect, wonderful. And to me, that is just the icing on the cake, on top of avoiding a lot of bad karmas. That is where it is for me primarily.
Yeah. Everybody has their own reasons, but I say it's like a win-win-win. It's good for our health.
Because if you recognize that first principle, all the second one is solvable. The nutritional problems, even right now, they're not that difficult, but even if they were, human beings, particularly the dharmic people, go through a lot of struggle to maintain the religious bent. So why make so much argument about perfect nutrition while not recognize that everything you do, you're going to go right back to violence?
Yeah.
If you don't accept it totally.
I agree with you.
So that's kind of where I am.
Thank you, Pradeep.
Yeah, that's a nice thought. A nice gesture to be vegan.
Yeah.
But okay, can we, I'm sorry, we are just running short of time. So we could not address a few more questions. Can I ask Jayesh Bhai to say a few words just for Dr. Reshma?
Thank you very much, Dr. Reshma Shah. Wonderful talk. Excellent. It says a lot of experience and knowledge you have gained, which you shared with us. So we are very thankful to you. And you have clarified so many myths, which people do ask the questions. Myself being geriatrician, I know I see the prevalence of heart disease, strokes, diabetes, hypertension, where I tell them treatment number 1, treatment number 2, treatment number 3 is diet and exercise. And what you mentioned, that I can relay that very well. And you clarified so many nutritional facts and vegetarian diet. So we are very thankful. Question answer, there were lots of good questions and you answered them very well. There was one question when someone asked about melasma. If you allow me, there's one more factor works on that melasma on top of this sun exposure and the iron, but hormonal facts also do work on it that causes this melasma. So just to add that. But thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Jayesh Bhai. Can we have Dr. Jashwant Modi to say a few closing words?
Jai Jinendra. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Are you able to start your video, Sahib? Oh, there you are.
Okay.
Perfect.
Jai Jinendra, thank you very much, Dr. Reshma Shah, for enlightening us on the plant-based food and the veganism. Jain Center of Southern California is the first Jain center that has become vegan 3 years ago. We Jains need to give up dairy product. If we cannot give up a dairy product, we cannot expect Americans to give up meat. If Jainism is not going to define veganism, vegans in the country and in the world about 80 million plus, they will define Jainism.
Yes.
We have to make a concentrated effort to see that the Jain community becomes vegan by persuasion education. Now, not only that the world is becoming vegan, world is becoming a planet-based living. One example, almond milk is not a dairy product and soy milk is not a dairy product. However, almond milk to produce, it takes 7 times more water than it takes soy production. In an almond, you have hundreds and thousands of the bees that you need for a pollination that ultimately gets killed. So not only that we need to become vegan, we need to have a planet-based living that is sustainable to the environment, to the climate, and to all humanities. So we have to make a progress, vegan and a planet-based living. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Josh. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Reshma. That was an amazing presentation and a lot of knowledge that I'm sure everyone would try and would apply in their day-to-day life. I also want to give a big thank you to our AV teams, to Narendra Pai and Samir. A big thank you to Avni for a beautiful flyer. And of course, a lovely audience for inspiring us and motivating us to do more and more in this. I hope you all enjoyed and thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Reshma. And I would like to thank your dad for recommending your name. Thank you so much. Mahendra Bhai. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you again soon for all the unanswered questions, and hopefully people will be more inspired to become vegan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It was a very informative session. Really appreciate having
By the way,
you.
she also brought in the whole food concept, which is also a very good addition.
Yes.
Not processed, so much processed versus whole.
Yes, just being vegan is different and eating whole food is different.
And Jasunbhai took it a step further in terms of the efficiency in climate control and planet control.
There was a good talk last week, and yes, vegan diet, going away from the dairy is very, very important, as we saw today that 50% of the cholesterol and other bad things is coming not just from the meat. Meat is only 25%, but 50% is coming from the dairy. So we need to become vegan, but now everybody is going towards planet-based living, less use of the plastics, less use of water. In that, they put up an example that an almond, it takes more water than soy production, and there are bees that are, you need the bees for the almond. So actually, you are killing a life. So we need to go in the direction of the veganism, but also planet-based living, very helpful for everybody, for humanity, for animals, for us. So thank you.
Hello.
Yes. Okay, so thank you all for being there. And I'm sorry.
Mona Ben, great program.
Oh, no, it was nice. We found someone who could really give us all the knowledge and information. I mean, that's what we needed next.
Yes.
Thank you, Meena Ben, giving me the Reshma the opportunity.
Yeah. Mona, you should do this program more often.
Yes. I mean, this was the first time, and Meena Ben suggested us. We had the right person. So it all worked out great. So the more information, it's good.
You do the program more often, we'll find the right person all the time for you.
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
Starting with just one way.
People all here waiting to get more and more knowledge. So it's perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Meena Ben, Mona Ben, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Mahendra Bhai, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much giving the opportunity to Reshma. Thank you very much.
And Reshma Ben ne khas kehjo.
Yes.
Hey, Mona, can I have one suggestion or a question for you?
Mm-hmm.
How about having like a group outing to a vegan restaurant, maybe on a monthly basis or so? So maybe, we can try more, and, that will probably help more people to, at least get a flavor of that and, lean towards that. Do you think have you thought about it, or do you think it's a doable or a practical idea?
I think we'll think about it later. Just now, because anyways, even the sessions we are doing